Welcome back to Learn SKN, and today we're going to continue looking at the CSEC syllabus for economics, and we are going to be covering international trade today. We're going to be looking at the advantages and disadvantages and what exactly international trade is all about. But before we do that, you know what to do. Hit the bell, subscribe, like. Alright, so let's just jump right into the content.
So international trade is where two countries, in essence, are exchanging goods and services with each other across international boundaries. So that's, for example, a Caribbean country is trading with America, Europe, Asia, wherever. That's international trade, right? We are just the exchange of goods and services across international boundaries, as you can see here. Now, countries that engage in international trade are said to have an open economy. Remember, when we look at barter, we learned that the bartering system was normally for a closed economy where you only did subsistence level production. Now today, in today's modern world, there are hardly any closed economies out there. The closest that comes to mind would be North Korea, right? But they do trade with some persons, but the closest is North Korea. Closed economies do not engage in any international trade, but open economies, they engage in international trade, and that's where they exchange goods and services with across international boundaries, borders, country to country. So St. Kitts to America, Trinidad to UK to Europe, wherever. So that's international trade in a nutshell. Closed economies, they do not engage in international trade. Open economies, they engage in international trade. Now, one of the worst things about international trade that persons would deem today is what we call protectionism. That is where a local government is trying to protect their local markets. So, for example, they would put up certain rules and licenses and restrictions and those things that would prevent international persons from trading competitively with the local businesses. So they might put on a heavy tariff on something that is being imported to try to dissuade persons or discourage persons from importing goods and sticking to local. They try to protect the local market. Maybe they may want to give a lot of subsidies, a lot of assistance to the local market or the local industries that would help them to be competitive. But a lot of countries frown upon protectionism. Well, they frown upon it when they are being the ones getting the brunt of it. But almost all countries engage in some form of protectionism, so don't let them fool you guys. Almost all of them engage in some form of protectionism. St. Kitts in particular is in a bad spot because normally we get the worst part of it. Everybody just dump things here, just bring things here, and we can't really impose anything on those other countries, right? They send their meat, they send their wood, they send their vehicle, they send all kind of things this way, but we can't really do anything in terms of repeating, because that is why you see a lot of our local farmers are getting licks from imports, because we can't really impose any protectionism, any restrictions on the importation of certain things. So protectionism is simply where the local government is trying to protect the local markets. Opposite to that, now we have what we call free trade. And free trade, on the other hand, is where there are no restrictions at all when it comes around trading between countries, between islands, trading goods and services between islands. There are no restrictions. And so that's what most people like, but they like it when it's one way. They like when they are not restricted, but when they want somebody want to come into their market now, they want to try to put all kind of barriers, non-tariff barriers, all kind of licenses and all kind of standards and stuff to try to keep you out of their market. But they will happily enter your market, and if they can't enter your market without any form of protectionism being in place, then they will start crying to the WTO. The WTO is the international organization that oversees trade between all the countries, basically all of the countries in the world, all of the well, I shouldn't say independent, but all of the sovereign states in the world. Right? You have 150 members. So normally, once you're a member of the UN, you're almost part of the WTO. And so they look over trade amongst all of these nations out there. And so they have certain objectives. to help the global trade flow as freely as possible, to reduce trade restrictions, to provide an impartial means of settling disputes. So if countries have disputes with each other, they can go to the WTO and try to settle these disputes. I know Trinidad and it was Venezuela were having some issues before. Guyana and some other islands are having disputes. China and almost everybody have disputes, but I don't think China really takes on the WTO like that. But if you have an issue with a country which, as it relates to trade, the WTO is the body that you go to try to sort out that. So apart from providing a means for settling disputes, they also reduce trade restrictions and they help global trade flow as freely as possible. So that's the WTO. And so that's international trade in a nutshell. Alright, so I was asking earlier, why is it that countries want to engage in trade? And I said one of the obvious answers would be the fact that we cannot produce all that we need in our islands. Nowhere in the world could really produce all they need. I'm not saying that some countries are not self-sufficient, because some of them are. Right? For example, America could just close down and, you know, live off of whatever they can produce there. Right? But there are some things that some countries have that others don't. And so, for example, certain metals that are used in electronics and those kind of things, earth metals and stuff, they're only found in China. And you know, you need them for your iPhones, your Galaxies, your technology, you need them. And so you need to engage in trade to get those kind of things. All countries do not have the same climate, right? And so certain food, fruits and vegetables that can flourish in one climate might not flourish in another climate. For example, in the Caribbean, we are hot all year round, and so certain fruits and vegetables that we have grown accustomed to eating now cannot really flourish in our atmosphere, in our weather. Same thing for certain animals. And so we have to engage in trade if you want to get that taste of those particular fruits and vegetables and meat kinds that are out there. And so all these are reasons why we may be engaging in international trade. So as individuals in a modern economy, we do not produce all that we consume. We are each endowed with different talents and abilities. Each of us adults specialize in a given occupation, trade. This factor service for money, and then use this money to purchase goods and services. Such specialization leads to increased output for all. Countries, as with people, are also endowed with different resources. You realize that some countries have oil, some don't. How else can we get fossil fuel? We have to trade for that. Right? Some countries got bauxite, gold, silver. Some don't. Some have nice forestry. Some don't. And so we have to engage in trade in order to acquire these things. It makes sense for each country to specialize in a product or products that it is good at producing. Trade this and purchase what it cannot produce. As we'll be seeing later in this chapter, when we look at specialization leads to increased output. So we're saying here that because we cannot make or produce everything that we need, we have to, or we cannot produce it efficiently, we have to engage in international trade. That's one of the main reasons we have to engage in international trade. Because all countries cannot produce everything that they need, or they can, but maybe not at an efficient level. Right? So, you know, we here in the Caribbean, small countries, we produce good tourism product. That's about it. Right? We have to rely on other countries for other things. Right? So, you'll see that's why we have to engage in trade, even regional trade, because Trinidad, Jamaica, Guyana, they have a higher level of manufacturing than most of the smaller islands. And so you see a lot of products coming from those places. You have your Charlie chocolates, and you have your Pine Hill from the larger islands, I mean from Barbados. You have your sunshine fruits and that kind of thing. All those things coming from different parts of the Caribbean. You have your Grace branded stuff. all that kind of thing, chief and all those things. So you can see even in our own backyard, we cannot produce everything we need, and so we have to engage in trade amongst each other. CARICOM. Okay, good. So let's say international trade is a win-win situation. Why? Win-win situation. All countries produce products for which they have the economic resources. They do so more cheaply than other countries which have few of them. When there is trade, a country imports what it cannot produce. Therefore, the countries of the world benefit. So they're saying, from trading, I sell you, you sell me, everybody happy, win-win. I buy from you what I cannot produce, you buy from me what I cannot produce, what you cannot produce, and so everybody benefits. Win-win situation, international trade. But of course, you know, later on we look at it, there are downsides to that, where trade might be just too one-sided for one country. And so only one country might be winning in that whole trading agreement. But we look at that later on when we're looking at balance of trade, balance of payments, etc. So, some advantages of trade. Some advantages of trade. You have a nice list here. You have a nice list of advantages of trade. The advantages of trade. Free trade opens up the world as a market for your product. Small Caribbean countries with small populations now find themselves with a much larger market for their products. Now hear what they say. Here, let me read that again. Free trade opens up the world as a market for your products. Small Caribbean countries with small populations now find themselves with a much larger market for their products. Now they say that's an advantage. True, that can be an advantage for certain countries, certain islands, but for the most part, when you're competing with the likes of Europe, North America, Asia, do we really have a chance? We don't really have a chance in certain areas, huh? But as I say here, it makes the world become our market. The entire world is our market, and so if you look at our tourism product that we push, we get customers, tourists, from all over the world, right? From all over the world. If our borders were closed, if we were a closed economy, then we wouldn't have had access, they wouldn't have had access to our country, or we wouldn't have had access to these people. And so you can see the advantage right there in tourism where, yes, we have access to the North American market, the European market, the Asian market, the African market, wherever. So that opens up a larger market for us. You know, free trade. So you can see where there is a plus. But of course you can see the disadvantage where, because we can't compete on a certain level, like for products and produce and those things, we get swamped with internationally branded stuff, and we can't make none for ourselves, or not enough for ourselves. But that's a caveat right there. So yeah, so free trade can open up the world. So if you're able to tap into the global market, if you are able to produce something that no one else can, then you have the whole world as your market. And so that's a plus right there. That's an advantage of trade right there, especially for smaller countries. Point number 2. Countries now have a larger variety of goods and services and a higher standard of living, which I agree with. As the Caribbean countries engage in more international trade, there is a greater variety of goods available. One glance at the supermarket shelves will reveal a range of chocolates, biscuits, wines, condiments, soaps, shampoos that have been imported. And I can't really argue with this point, right? Because you would have lived it, you have seen it. The mere fact that we have access to other markets gives us variety, gives us options, choices, right? So you don't have to run down to your local shoe store or your local clothing store and just stick with what they have. You can jump online, get access to a wider range, a wider variety of shoes, a wider range, a wider variety of clothing. Import them, you order them on Amazon, Walmart, Shein, wherever, you know, Zapdos, wherever you want to buy, get them here, you have access to it like that. You go, you want a used car, maybe the local market only have a Toyota dealer, Suzuki dealer, whatever. You jump online, you jump on Be Forward, or Japanese cars, or whatever you want to look at. You get access to a whole lot of different cars out there. You'll be surprised to know how many different cars Toyota makes. Not just the RAV and the Camry and the Yaris. There's so many other cars out there you don't even imagine. Right? But you jump online, you see all the variety out there, and you can choose. So, yes, it gives a larger variety of goods and services. Look at Netflix. Like there's no Netflix in the Caribbean. We have access to the international one now. Right? So we have access to that kind of service because we are open for business as an economy. So you have access to different services, Netflix, HBO Plus, Hulu, Apple Music, whatever. Right? So those are some advantages of trade right there. With a larger market, firms produce more. As firms produce more, they can grow in size and they can therefore benefit from economies of scale. And so you know what economies of scale is? It's those advantages that companies gain by growing, such as reduced costs of doing business, whether it's shopping in bulk, people lending you money more because you're a big business now, things like that. But they're saying here is that because they have access to a larger market, now you can increase the scale of your production, right? You can grow as a business. Some businesses tap out the local market, just tap it out, and they have nowhere else to go. But with international trade, with an open economy, they can now venture into exporting, right? Venture into exporting. If you look at, well, Jamaica is a good example. We have Grace Kennedy, and as you can see, a lot of Grace products are sold here in the Lesser Antilles, right? In the Leeward Islands. I mean, imagine that you only have Jamaicans are 2.something million people. So imagine you tap out the market. Where else can you go? Okay, down the islands. You go down Trinidad, at 1.3 million there. You go down to the rest of the Leeward Islands, you got, you know, 50,000 here and 70,000 there. So you increase the market because you have international trade and they're able to grow. That is why Grace Kennedy is one of the largest conglomerates in the Caribbean. They are the ones who are in charge of Grace Foods, they're in charge of Western Union, and a number of other things. Right? The whole conglomerate. So, the larger markets allow you to grow as a company and not just pigeonhole you or keep you in a box for just your local economy only. You can go outside the box. A firm produce more for sale. As firm produce more for sale, they become better at producing those goods. They might purchase machinery to assist in production. All this increase efficiency. So they are saying here, as you become specialized in what you do, you can now become so efficient at producing this particular thing that could become an advantage for you, right? Because you're producing it enough for this large market, you're becoming more professional, you're becoming more efficient at producing that particular good. And so you can now, you know, customize machine for that particular product. Because you're so good at it now, you become more efficient, and so you're saving money by producing this good at this level, right? So that's the next advantage of international trade. It sharpens your skills. Make you become more efficient at what you're doing, because you become basically a specialist in that particular area, right? As industries grow, output increases. Factor inputs must be increased. That is land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, or enterprise. This creates increased employment. And we could have seen that from a mile away. As a company grows, as they now venture into the international market, the surplus market, the export market, they are going to need to employ more resources. And not just people, but more land, more labor, more capital. And so that would in turn lead to increased output in the economy, more people getting employed in order to meet that international demand. And so you can see there how international trade can benefit the country on a whole, because you have to employ more persons now, because you cannot have the same level of input that you would if you're producing just for the local economy than if you now start venturing into the international market. You need to upgrade, you need to improve, and so you are now forced to do so. You are now forced to do so once you know looking at the international market. And so employment in the country would go up. As firms have a wider market and they sell goods and services, the firms earn valuable foreign exchange. And we know that the dollar, the American dollar, the greenback, that's the currency of business. That's the business dollar. That's the currency of business. And so you will realize that now if you're venturing into international markets, international trade, now you're earning foreign exchange for the country and for your company. So you can do more business on that international level now. Because now that you're reaching different markets, you're now trading in different currencies. Could be the pound, it could be the euro, but most of all the US dollar. And so you earn more when you venture in the international trade. As a range of industries grow and develops, this leads to economic development in the producing country. So they are saying here, international trade can help to lead to economic development. Because as you ramp up your production, ramp up your trade, the country start earning more. Whether it is earning more in the form of foreign exchange, or the companies paying more taxes, or they can now charge for imports. You know, charge tariffs and taxes for imports, because we're talking about international trade here. Two-way. Right? That means now that the country can earn more income, GDP can increase, and so if the money is spent properly, this can lead to economic development. And we looked at economic development before, and so we know one way to achieve this is to increase international trade, whether it is to increase the exports that the country engage in to earn more money. And so these monies can be used to engage, to help to develop the country. Not only money alone, but also services. You can bring services to the country now that can enhance the overall livelihood, the overall living standard of the people in the country. Imagine faster internet. That would help to be more productive. Imagine better phone services. We went from edge to GPRS to edge to 3G to 4G, now to the LTE, now we're up to 5G, right? And all that, those are international standards. And so they came to our countries, and so we are more efficient now with certain technologically based businesses. International trade allows countries of the world to specialize and produce the goods that they are best suited to produce. This leads to an efficient allocation of the world's resources. Countries produce based on the skills and expertise of their labor and or its factor endowments. So again, we're going to look at that later on when we're looking at comparative advantage and absolute advantage. But the idea here is that because of international trade, countries can specialize in just what they are good at. Instead of trying to produce all the things you need, some inefficiently, some efficiently, you can basically say, okay, I don't have to produce this because someone else produces it cheaper than me, and it would cost me less to import it. Look at Sinkis back in the day. We used to produce sugar, but it came to a point where it was so expensive for us to produce sugar, it made sense to just import. And that's the case today with a lot of countries in the Caribbean. It makes sense to import certain things because we're not good at producing them. Right? So that's what international trade allows us to focus on what we're good at and leave the rest to somebody else who's good at it, and then we import from them, right? So international trade allows for that. International trade promotes better international relations among countries of the world. So ultimately, we have a lot of diplomatic ties through trade, right? A lot of countries we tie diplomatically, and that involves trading. Normally, that's one of the first things that diplomacy opens up. Trade. You go, you become friendly with the country because you want to engage in trade. You go way back to the spice route and stuff like that back in ancient times, where countries had diplomatic relations because of trade. Everybody wanted to benefit, right? And so you would have seen that happen all around the world, happening today still, right? China has diplomatic relationship with a lot of persons, a lot of countries through trade, right? So all those are some of the advantages that they have highlighted for international trade. Disadvantages of international trade. International trade can make a country dependent on other countries for vital goods. For example, foodstuff. If prices increase or if quantity supply decreases, the importing country will suffer. And clearly, that is a major disadvantage of relying too heavily on international trade. And I know that a lot of the Caribbean countries, they are at risk for this one in particular. You would recall that there are some, I mean, look at it right now. Look at what's happening right now. Because of the global supply chain confusion, because there's such a mess in the supply chain right now in the world, things are taking forever to reach down to the smaller countries. You have items that you would have ordered since Christmas. Some of them ain't even reach yet, right? Some ain't even reach yet. So that's just a taste of what can happen when international trade go wrong. When things just ain't working out as they're supposed to, when logistics are just not working out. Imagine that happen with food. We're going to starve, right? Because majority of the countries import a great deal of the food that they consume, especially the smaller countries. Some of us have an import bill of over 90% of the food that we eat. And so you realize that if we rely so heavily on trade and something happens, hurricane, a natural disaster, something, then the country is going to suffer. And you can, like I said, you can see it right now with the global supply chain mess. There are things on boats not being loaded off because no truckman there. You know, you have backlogs, all kind of confusion going on right now in the industries. And so that's one major disadvantage of international trade. Countries who are too dependent on other countries, they can suffer when that country can no longer supply them with what they normally do. Right? I know we saw that happen a couple of weeks ago, where was it? Food boats the boat them didn't come, and so when we went to a couple of supermarkets, we realized that the shelves, the produced aisle was kind of empty. I remember going to Rams, Best Buy, Value Mart, and you want to know what happened? A hurricane come through here? No, the boat them just didn't come. And so we did not get what we could have gotten. And so we can see that as a major disadvantage for international trade. International trade exposes domestic industries to unfair foreign competition. Foreign firms might be well established and able to offer cheaper prices for better quality products. Quantity demanded of local goods by foreigners and domestic residents will fall, and so will employment. The firm might even be forced to shut down. And I know, I don't really have to tell you how true this one is, because you know this, right? International trade is a major competitor for the local industries. We have seen a lot of local industries just gone by the wayside because they can't compete with international firms, international companies. Some of these companies are 100 years old. They already have advantages. Look at farming products. You go to Brazil. Brazil have a whole advantage of producing beef, producing pork. We can't compete on that kind of level. They have economies of scale over there. Meaning, their products can be made cheaper. It might be of a similar quality, might be lower sometimes, but it can be made cheaper. And it's all about the bottom line. And if a supermarket realizes they can get something overseas for cheaper than local, then you know, it's all about the bottom line. And so if their pockets are going to be boosted by going imports, they're going to import. And so international trade is a major competitor for domestic industries. They suffer a lot because of that. And that is why sometimes you have protectionism becoming a part of government policies, even though it shouldn't. Right? So you can see that, you can see how international trade can be disadvantageous to local companies, local establishments. Because even for some of us here, we have a foreign taste, right? We have a foreign taste. And so we'd rather buy something foreign than to buy local. Because we just have the expectation that we have this mindset that foreign is better. And so we're quicker buy the foreign than the local. And sometimes the local products just cannot compete in terms of price because they have to pay all these taxes, these tariffs to get them here. And then what? They have to sell them for expensive amount of money. Look at electronics. To buy electronics locally is a killer. Right? It's a killer. So sometimes it doesn't make sense to even engage in that. Right? So that's an disadvantage right there. Last one I have here in the book. Last one, let me see. No, second to last one I have here. Many developing countries might trade primary products, that is, minerals and agricultural produce. We know how that goes, extraction. When a country has continuous trade and keeps on producing, this might lead to the depletion of mineral resources. When this occurs, the country might not have export alternative to produce for trade. Examples of non-renewable resources in the region will eventually be depleted are petroleum, natural gas, and bauxite. So what they're saying here is that some countries rely heavily on non-renewable resources as a main aim of trading, international trade. You know, Trinidad would have the natural gas and the petroleum, Jamaica the bauxite. And what they're saying there, we are small countries, relatively. And so there comes a day where all these resources will run out. And when they run out, what are we going to left to trade? Nothing. Because the international market has an insatiable appetite for certain non-renewable resources. It's a good thing we are moving more to EVs, electronic vehicles. No, because that means that petroleum and natural gas and those kind of things, you know, well, gasoline in particular will be a thing of the past. So, you know, you might not have to rely too heavily on that. But then, you know, you have to trade with different things though, because the components in these vehicles, you know, earth minerals, things in the batteries and stuff like that, lithium in the iron battery and things like that, you know, those are different resources that they have to be mined again, right? So, again, primary resources might be depleted because they are heavily relied upon by some of the smaller countries, right? So, that's a disadvantage right there, the depletion of the natural resources. And the last one I have here, overseas markets. Overseas markets in underdeveloped countries might find the workers paid very poorly, even by standards of the country. Cheap production in China, India, Africa has led to the exploitation of workers through low wages and poor working conditions. So what I'm saying here is that because of the thirst for trading goods, right? This leads to the people want to be like for example, China in particular want to be the main exporter for everything. They want everything produced in China and exported from China. That's what they want to be known as. They want to be the ones producing everything. And because of this, they have low wages. And that's one of the reasons they can be so cheap. Their products can be so cheap because in China, they pay the people nuts change if they pay them at all. China, India, Africa, sweatshops. I mean, child labor. Really, really low wages. That is a way that they can keep the price of these products so low. Poor working conditions, low wages. And so in order to to feed the appetite of the international market, they force these poor labor conditions, poor working conditions, low wages onto the people so that they can maintain their overseas markets. And so they are saying here, if there was no international trade, everything was done within, then there would not be these kind of exploitative practices going down. Right? But a lot of these countries, they want to be the ones producing all these things and exporting them. And so that leads them to exploiting their labor force. Right? Good. So those are the disadvantages of international trade.
So we'll study for now, and we'll jump back in next time looking at factors that influence international trade, both from the imports perspective and the export perspective. So if you want to know when that video drops, make sure you hit the bell, you like the video, and you subscribe to the channel. Right, so that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.